All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is a lot of Santina's logged in over there. Pretty hilarious. I'm reading the chat box. For those of you who are logged in, we have an ongoing opportunity to communicate via chat. Just some of the ground rules. I'm sure everybody's getting used to Zoom meetings or remote meetings taking place. We're going to keep you on mute throughout the presentation today and the workshop, but we do have some interactive sessions where we'll probably have you come off of mute, but always please feel free to use the chat box if you have a question as we go. I'm Chris Fabian, by the way. This is the second course in the week. Yesterday, Liz led off a course for many of you on the call were in attendance. Yesterday's course was all about the initial data set that we're trying to collect. So I saw that Teresa from Longmont, Mike Farina from Castle Pines, and Jamie from Strathcona. I know you haven't had a chance to, I don't think you attended yesterday's course, which is totally fine. We have a repeat session of the exact same data collection course taking place tomorrow, and Liz will be leading that course as well to make sure that you know how to fill out the template. Hopefully it's fairly self-explanatory, but we also have a recording from Liz, and Liz, maybe you can reach out to Longmont, Castle Pines, and Strathcona, just make sure that they have access to that. Perfect, thank you very much. Today's session is a follow-up on yesterday's. Once we have your data loaded, which we do for Lawrence, Kansas, and Jefferson County, Wisconsin, the next component of the workshop, which is what we're going to cover in today's 1-hour session, is about forecasting. So how to take your single year of data and actually use the tools to do the forecasting for out years. That's part one. And the second part is going to be about scenario planning, how to use the tools to create different what-if scenarios to plan around. So I'll show you some tool functionality. The style of the course is I'm going to be working a lot in the tools to demonstrate how you can use some of the features and functions. Summer Montgomery's on the line to help course correct me when I do something incorrectly. Hopefully that will be minimal. And then there'll be some interactive opportunities to see what you would like to practice with for the forecasting section and also for scenario planning. We're going to have a quick check-in in one moment for anybody who's having some questions on the initial data template, just to give everybody a chance to ask their questions there. And we'll also try to leave some time at the end of today's session for some additional Q&A. Friday at 2 p.m. Mountain Time, we will have yet one other open hours session for anybody who has some basic questions. So it'll be less teaching and training and more just come with questions that you have. If you need some help filling out the data template, that's what we'll be trying to do on Friday afternoon. And let's see, just covering some first parts. Oh, I also wanted to let you know, we're going to be posting all of the videos and slides onto our Fiscal Health Slack channel. And Liz, if you wouldn't mind dropping that link into the chat box, that'd be awesome. And on our website, you can actually just go to resourcex.net, and we have a box here that has our link to all of the COVID support that we're providing, and the classes. We have a place to register here as well. So I think that covers the bases. As a quick, thank you very much, Liz, for posting that. Hopefully everybody's seeing what Liz is posting in the chat box. As a quick check-in before we get started, if anybody had a question on yesterday's session or what it takes to fill out the ongoing versus one-time data template that we're hoping to get back from everybody. Anyone want to enter their questions in chat and we can address those now. Or if not, if everything's going fairly smoothly on that front, we can also just move right into today's session. I'll just pause for 1 second, give anybody a chance to write if they're writing. All right, seeing none, we'll just get right into it. So before we get into the training today, I wanted to start with a demo of the fiscal health model that we're using. And in doing so, I can hopefully explain some of the features and how to use this tool as both a communication device, communicating your financial position today and into the future, and also as a scenario planning tool to be able to model various what-if scenarios to drive decision making. So I mentioned in yesterday's introduction how several communities were beginning to reach out to us in terms of, do we have a way to depict various ways that the recovery might take shape? And while clearly priority-based budgeting data can be useful as you start to think about how to react to various financial futures, the initial question was, how can we get our arms around the uncertainty of the financial futures that we're facing in the short term? So this is our financial forecasting and scenario planning tool. We call it Fiscal Health. And when you open up the tool itself, the main dashboard includes 4 main charts, and I'm going to walk you through these. From the bottom left, one of the principles of our analysis and the way that we both collect your data and forecast it is to do a differentiation of what we call ongoing, reliable, predictable revenue and expenses versus those sources and uses that are more of a one-time nature. And we talked a little bit about how to distinguish ongoing from one-time yesterday, but part of the reason that we do it is because we can show in 2 different charts how your ongoing sustainable revenue streams look, and if they're able to support what you have projected as your ongoing operational expenses, versus over here on the one-time side of the house, over the same time period, what one-time sources look like versus one-time expenses. Up here in the top left, we have a combined picture. This is everything put together, ongoing plus one-time sources and uses. And in the top right is your fund balance all along the way. So in this organization, this is a nice, healthy fund balance moving out into the future. For any of these charts, if you wanted to zoom in to get a little bit closer detail, you can certainly do that. And there's basic hover overs to see what the data itself is reading. So you look at an organization with this kind of a picture, and this is not bad. You have your blue line is your revenue, your red line are the expenses, and the fund balance looking pretty healthy. And over here on the left, part of the reason we designed this tool is to start to incorporate various decisions that you might make and depict their impact. So here, this very first one is an initiative, a decision to be made. And any particular decision, like this rec center here, can have ongoing expenses. It could have ongoing revenue. It could have one-time expenses. It could have one-time revenue. As you see in this particular chart, the one-time expenses predicted in 2022 is the capital construction of the rec center. And then for 2023, 2024, and beyond, you start to see part of the assumption that's built in the ongoing expenses to run the rec center and perhaps the ongoing revenue to support the rec center, the fees that people might pay. And in this particular demo, it's a break-even scenario. And we can go ahead and click yes onto the rec center. And what you've seen take place is we have the large increase of the one-time capital construction. We've also added to our ongoing expenses, but we also added to our ongoing revenue streams. Our fund balance took a little bit of a hit, but not that big of a deal. And here's our total picture overall. As we go down the list, we could add, here's an ongoing asset management plan for water infrastructure. Here is a firehouse that needs to get constructed. We're starting to watch ever so closely the right-hand side of the screen as our fund balance is going down, but it still looks affordable. Here is a comp study to pay for salary increases for our employees. And we see if we approve that comp study, we have now gone below zero by 2023. No problem whatsoever. It's just keeping track of that what if decision. And this is how we begin to use the tool, is to say, well, if that is our projection, what other things might we do to make sure that we don't go underwater for fund balance? We could approve marijuana. Here we go. This is fantastic. Just kidding. We just added substantially to our income stream. We could consider pushing the comp study out a couple of years. So here is moving the comp study to 2021, and we just barely make it. That's not too bad. But we also had a 10-year CIP that we wanted to plot. So maybe we move that comp study out just a little bit longer. In doing this practice demonstration, I hope that you start to get the idea of how the tool gets used. When we created it in Jefferson County back in 2007, 2008, initially, the very first version, it was to help our elected officials during the Great Recession as they were starting to try to understand what they could afford, and also as the economy started to show some negative signs, what decisions we might make if certain things were, if certain revenue streams were going in the wrong direction. So this is the main dashboard of how we start to use this particular tool. Now, what we also wanted to begin to model were various what if scenarios here. And in this particular case, I forget what I had shown here. I'm going to try to match it up exactly. So here's where we just were in our main baseline scenario. And we wanted to model a particular negative situation, a possible future that we might face. And in this case, this is what we were talking about yesterday. What if we took an example, for instance, we were talking about one particular city who has a pretty strong restaurant and beverage industry. And as those businesses have basically closed for the here and now, the recognition was that that makes up approximately 20% of their general fund revenue streams. And that's what they wanted to model, was what if this recovery is actually not coming anytime soon, and those particular industries go out of business, or what is the worst case scenario that we can imagine? Here, as I click yes to sales tax decline of 20%, we see our baseline. This is what we were planning in this particular organization 3 weeks ago. Things looked far rosier, and now we've done the 20% sales tax decline, and we see our revenue stream has taken a one-time drop, and there's an assumption built into our projection that suggests that there will be some sort of recovery or comeback, though it might be out in future years. And the idea is then to say, okay, if we believe this is one scenario we can imagine, and here we are, we've gone underwater by at least 2021, what decisions can we make? What things can we look for to start to understand how we're going to bridge this gap? So here's what if the federal aid package passes and we are able to receive some level of relief support. If I approve that, I just saw a one-time boost in revenue that comes in, and that looks to really help the situation in the short term. But we can begin to model and say, well, what if we don't actually see those resources until 2021? We can start to push that out and picture what might take place, which then might require us to start and look for other potential solutions to bridge the gap here between 2021 and 2022. This is the initial demo. I just wanted to start with kind of a shortened version of this to help you see the purpose of the tool, how we're starting to incorporate what if scenarios, and I wanted to get your brain started as we get into today's session. We'll start with forecasting, and then get into scenario building. But we want you to be able to communicate the exact same things that you're worried about or that your elected officials are starting to think about. What are the worst case scenarios you might be facing? And if we can begin to bound that uncertainty, it will hopefully help to begin to create solutions that get these lines back in order and prevent you from going underwater. That's the hope. I'll stop here for just 1 second. The next section, I'm just going to dive right into forecasting functions and the tools. But any questions or anybody want to chime in at this point? Cool. Very good. Well, let's get into the first section is on forecasting. And what I wanted to say is the tool itself is not a tool to create your strategy. There's no algorithm in the tool to give you advice on what your sales tax or property tax revenue projections should be. Instead, the tool is hopefully providing all the different types of ways that you might enter in your forecast so it's accurate and accurately depicted for the long term. We have Shane Kavanaugh on the line from GFOA, and if you need some strategy support on actually how to do financial forecasting, Shane is the person you should be speaking with. What I wanted to do, I'm going to move over to Lawrence, Kansas's data. Lawrence will use your data set as the guinea pig. I wanted to begin to walk you through within the tools how and where forecasting takes place. So for all of you who end up sending your data set to Liz, Liz is loading the data into the fiscal health tool and getting you started. And as you see here for Lawrence, as you get your first data set, it's a snapshot. It's a point in time for whatever you've sent over. And in this case, all the out years are projected at flat here, which actually wouldn't be that bad in Lawrence. With your revenues over expenses, you're just growing a substantial fund balance into the future. This looks fantastic overall. There are two sections I'm going to go through for forecasting, and then we'll actually take some time to think through ways that you might want to model forecasts, and we can do some interactive exercise. The first section, I'm going to go over to this tab called Projections, which is within the tool where you can see all of the line items that we've loaded. This table will sort for you if I wanted to look at largest to smallest expenses and revenue. This OG stands for ongoing basis. There's a projection type that I'll walk us through that varies between a constant annual projection, that's just a percentage out into the future. Hey, regular salaries are going to increase at 4% per year. And then there's an opportunity in the tool to do a varying annual projection for any of your revenues or expenses that might not be so easily calculated on a constant annual basis. One quick question, maybe type it informal survey into the group chat. How many of you already have projections for all of your revenues and expenses, say within the general fund for the next 3 years, next 5 years, next 10 years out? Do all of you have projections already? Or type in the chat box, is this an exercise that you might be going through for the first time, is making projections on this year's data set? This is a good way to see if everybody knows that they can get to the chat box too. In Zoom, first time for Jefferson County, great. Thanks, Mark. In Zoom, if you haven't found the chat box, there's a menu bar that drops down. If chat isn't a widget that immediately comes down, you can click more, and there are several drop downs to choose from, one of which is chat. Thanks, Danielle. You have general projections that go out 5 years. That's cool. How about Longmont or Strathcona or Castle Pines, or I think Fort Sask is on the line too. Castle Pines, great. Thanks, Mike. So it sounds like from informal survey, there might be some of you who are in the midst of creating projections, and that's fantastic. And some of you actually have some projections to enter. The hope is you can start with your baseline projections, where you imagined you were headed, and I'm going to walk you through some simple ways to do this. Let me use, I'm going to click on these 3 bars over here to the left, which opens up a filter table, if you see what I'm doing. And let's just start with revenues for an example. And we'll start with revenues. So now it's setting on just the revenues in the general fund. We could subset on ongoing versus one time. I'm going to sort these from top to bottom, which is kind of cool. And here for Lawrence, one way to do your projections is to literally go through each one of these and say, here's ad valorem property tax, here's local sales tax, here's countywide sales tax, and go through line by line and enter in what that increase might be. So for example, I'm going to take sales tax and say, our projections, Danielle, let's just say it was going to be 3% for sales tax. That's great. I'm going to just enter in some general numbers, assuming that we've done the analysis and we have some basic approach to how this comes together. Here's miscellaneous billed charges. We've seen history shows us that it barely grows, but we have some data on the issue. Again, hopefully you are going to have this strategy coming from somewhere. If you actually need some strategic consulting help, GFOA's website is going to be an ideal resource for you. And as I come back to the main plot, let's see here. I have reset all of my projections. Sorry about that. Summer, I might need your interjection right here. I was just beginning to type in some, if you can take over, please.
Sure. I can't take over on your screen, I don't think.
Nope.
But go to the scenarios tab real quick and let's see what's data checked here. Maybe let's start off by checking the adding the 2019 and the 2020.
Cool.
And then head over again. So we're calculating projections down at that bottom box below your mouse there for 5 years. And then we're going to plot these 4 years. So head over to that plots tab real quick and let's see that plot updated.
Aha.
So that's our data now. And then back to projections. Check out that scenario, go to scenarios tab and let's see what. Right now we're using the user default, which is what we were editing. So go back to projections again.
Okay.
And then do that filter. Oh, it's still there. So I'm not sure why those reset. Maybe you didn't hit return. Sometimes you have to enter it and then hit return for it to register.
Yeah.
So maybe
it
didn't properly grab it.
That's totally cool. Let me go back here and show. So what you have the option to do is make a projection off of this is the data that Lawrence loaded. They loaded 2017 data set, 2018, 2019, and a projected 2020. And these are options for you. You could take off your 2020 projections and say, those are not what we want to use. We want to only use 2019 and make our projections from that 2019 data set. Or you can say, let's leave the 2020 projections in there. And now the 5 years out for projected years are starting with the last data set selected, and then forecasting 5 years out. And what's cool is you can go through and do your projections either line by line. If you wanted to do a bunch of them at the exact same time, we can go to set all of the projections to a certain value. I mean, let's just say it's 3. there's our general inflation, and go back and kind of see everything is now just moving up on the revenue side. Keep in mind I had done the subset of revenues using this filter table. And then if we just selected the expenses and we wanted to do something similar, just for the purpose of demonstration, I can select all of these to, this is make them grow at a smaller rate, 2%, just so you can see the impact overall. And we come back here, and if you saw that, the red line is now growing at a 2% slope, and the blue line is growing at a 3% slope. I'm showing that to you, not that you would do your projections that way, just to select all revenues and call it 3%, or take all expenses and make them 2%, but to show you that you can save yourself some time by using the filters to subset on particular revenue or expenses, and actually drill down even further if we wanted to take them one by one, and enter in the appropriate projection that you want to use. So hopefully that came across okay. The other way to do the projections, and part of the reason I was asking if any of you already had some projections to enter, we don't necessarily want you to have to go back through and enter all of these numbers one by one, but we can actually go in and download a table to enter in those projections, and I'll show you how to do that in 1 second. There was one more thing I wanted to demonstrate here, and let me go back. I was just looking at my notes. We'll just take a revenue, and I showed you constant annual projection. Let's just say we wanted to explore what you can do with the variable annual projection, which is pretty neat. So here we have revenues coming in for cemetery fees, and we have Lawrence's data 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. And what we are allowing the tool to do here is say, on a percentage basis, if we thought it's going to be 0 in 2021, or growing at a slight rate, maybe we calculated that it was 2%, it will actually do the calculation of the increment of increase and bring your new projection up to where it should be. If we didn't know the actual percentage calculation, we just wanted to use a dollar amount, we think it's going to increase by $5,000 or so for that year, it will back calculate the percentage. So you can go either way, which is kind of handy. So in this case, maybe it's 2%, 4%, and then we reach build out in the cemetery, and there's no fee increases for 2024 and 2025 because there's no more fees or plots to sell. So that could be a scenario, and then you could save that value to the database, and now this particular revenue stream is saved as a variable annual projection, which is pretty neat. Another thing that's kind of cool, so as you're using the main front page over here, you see that there is a big blank space over here to the left, and we have all of the forecast assumptions and the trajectory of those revenue expenses being built from our projection worksheet in the background. What we found is that maybe in your planning discussion, as you start to consider what if scenarios, you may want to bring certain revenue streams or expenses that you want to discuss up to the forefront without having to discuss every single one in your planning meeting. So let's take local sales tax, for example. What Summer has done is we can click add to the front menu, and when we come over to plots, it brings what we currently have projected, and this allows us to do the projections live. Let's say we had 50% increase in sales tax. Just to prove the point, here we brought this single revenue source, so you can bring over as many as you'd like, and we can see the changes to our assumptions. Or in the scenario that we just did for the demo model, if we said, minus 80%, we're going to take a serious hit, is more our worry, then that will plot the reduction in sales tax And what's cool about that is you can start to pick and choose the revenue streams that you want to talk about and model, and those that you don't really care about, showing to your elected officials or to your city managers. You're going through that discussion overall. So hopefully that makes sense. The search is yet one more way to filter on particular revenues or expenses that you want to take a look at. That can be handy. I won't go through every single function or feature in the tools, but just so you start to get a sense for what to do. So just as a reminder, that was in the projections tab. I'm going to move over to the wrench for the second way to enter your projections is here in the utility area. And as I scroll down to the bottom, I see an opportunity to do a download of an Excel spreadsheet and a re-upload. There are different data sets. The tool will accommodate different spreadsheets or different large data sets of your projections. So the warning is just make sure that you know which data set you are downloading and uploading. Here in Lawrence, in scenarios, I'm on user default. So I just want to make sure that is the data set that I'm pulling down and loading back up. Such as user default. I'm going to download this projection set into an Excel spreadsheet. And when I open it back up, here is the spreadsheet that comes down. So same data for everything. Here are my years across the top. And here are those revenues and expense line items. And for everybody familiar with Excel, you can make this to your liking. You just can't reformat the sheet, keep everything in the same order, because we're going to be re-uploading it here in just a second. The default is constant annual projection, just like you saw in the online user interface. And what to do is right here, this is ongoing constant annual projection value. This is where you're entering that percentage, just like we were doing in the user interface. So this is one way to enter the data. We can just enter, hey, for ball diamond equipment, it's 3%. Whoops, sorry, wrong column. 3% over here, 5% for the breathing apparatus, computer lease purchase, 6%, and so on. And then when we re-upload it, it's going to take and include these particular projections. So hopefully that is clear. If you wanted to do a variable annual projection, so here we have breathing apparatus, you would just type, instead of CAP, it's VAP. And then what you would type in to the right over here are the actual percentage increases or decreases for that particular line item in any of the out years. So if we wanted to say in 2020, breathing apparatus, we believe this is going to go up 100%. In 2021, it's going to be still 75%. And hopefully in 2022, we're going to bring that down to minus 50% or something like that. Just as an example, I save this file. I'm going to just save it to my downloads as save as, saving. And then I come back to making sure I choose my user default. I'm going to look for that file. Here's my Fabian file, re-upload it, update query, success. Sometimes it's just like a user warning. I will just refresh and get back into the tool when I'm doing the large batch updates. And then I'm going to go back and check to see if my breathing apparatus and everything else came back in. I'll re-log in here in my Lawrence database. go back down to fiscal health. And let's go to my projections. Here's my breathing apparatus. Note that it already is showing the variable annual projection because that's what I just typed in my upload. So that's a good sign. And if I go to edit it, it's bringing exactly what I had entered into that table. So that is pretty cool. All right, so that's the forecasting section. Thought I'd take like 5 minutes. I was trying to go through that in enough detail, but not excruciating detail, to make sure that you could see your two different options for getting your forecast incorporated into the tool. But I'll stop here for a second. In the do part that we just learned, do you have an example of a particular revenue stream that you want to model, or you have some questions about, so we can do it together using the tool live? Anybody have questions as an example? It's okay if you don't. And I guess, as with anything, it'll probably be useful as you just get into the tool and try it and experiment. And then as you do have some questions, feel free to bring them to that open hour session on Friday, and we can make sure to help troubleshoot. But hopefully that was pretty straightforward. And that is our forecasting component. Mark says, how do we change ongoing to one time? Mark, I'm going to take you off mute for a second just to see, are you asking, maybe you loaded something as ongoing and you want to change it to one time as a particular source? Is that the question?
Yes, that's a question.
All right. That might be Summer or Liz, if you feel, if you can chime in on what's your best recommendation for changing ongoing or one time.
Liz?
I'm happy to answer. Summer, correct me if you feel like you have a better pathway, but this tab, Mark, and everyone, util with the little wrench, if you click there, you can click download budget data. That is going to bring up that template that you all populated for me to get your data into the tools. And all you have to do is, it's still organized in the columns that you input there, and you can just move a value from one column to the other.
Makes sense.
So if
Mark, is that helpful?
Yeah, very helpful.
Perfect. And if you have any issues with that, just don't hesitate to reach out to me, and
Okay.
And we can work on that together.
Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. We have, thanks a lot, Mark. We have about 20 minutes left, and I want to get into scenario building, and we can continue to, Lawrence, for all the folks in Lawrence, Kansas, thanks for letting us use your data set. It's helpful to be able to show where most people will be once their first data set is loaded, and how to start to build those projections, and now how to get into scenario building. But rest assured, we will revise this so it goes right back to where you had it prior to me messing it up. So let's get into scenario building. All right, so the idea here is, if you recall in my initial demo, I had a main scenario, and this was like the scenario that we had built prior to COVID, and this is our financial forecast towards the out years, and we're just making normal decisions on what we can afford and how to push things into the out years. And then we had a different scenario, which is worst case scenario 1, And in the background of this scenario, it was kind of nice to be able to see here's where we were, our baseline scenario that we had planned, and now here's where we are, and these are the new decisions that we need to start to make. So being able to have that comparison, how we did that, you'll see there's a scenarios tab, and in the scenarios tab, I've chosen worst case scenario. In this bottom right area, you see a box that says, do you want to have a background scenario? And I chose yes, I wanted my main scenario to be there. If I chose none, then that's fine. You don't have to have a background scenario the whole time, but sometimes that comparison can be really useful. But if it's not serving you, or it's bringing a story that you don't necessarily need to get into any point of comparison, you can omit that and choose none for your background. Well, how did I create this worst case scenario from my main scenario? The way that that's done, and I'll go back into Lawrence's data. So right now we only have one scenario here, scenario one. It's the main scenario that was loaded in the first place. And if I want to create a new one, I just click new scenario. I can type in the name, worst case version A. And now I have created this particular scenario. And in the background, I could choose our baseline scenario one for Lawrence. And that way we always have something to compare to. But again, you definitely don't have to. This is how to create different scenarios. Why would you create one scenario versus another? The reason is because you might want to have a scenario of different financial situations that could unfold. So for example, in my demo, I wanted that to be the place where I was modeling the drop in the sales tax by 20%. And I didn't want that necessarily to be on my main screen, but I could have. You might say, what's the difference? I could have just added that initiative, which I'll get into in just a moment, up on this set of options that we're choosing from. But you might want different scenarios because they're easy to load and they're like saved versions of a set of assumptions that you can quickly get to. So for practicality's sake, as you're starting to use this tool over the next few weeks, one thought that we had was you might have worst case scenario as of March 25th. That would be your title, worst case scenario as of March 25th. But as we've seen, the situation is changing drastically. Maybe it will get worse. Maybe it will change for the better. And it's a good way to tell your story, to say, last time we were here, our worst case scenario on March 25th looked something like this. Now we're pretty certain that a drop in sales tax of 20% is unlikely because we've seen a rapid turnaround in the situation, and we think people are going to be able to access small business administration grants or whatever the situation is. And now it's a better scenario, and maybe you want to plot, what your worst case was as of March 25th as your background scenario, while you then create a new one, worst case scenario as of April 1st, as the situation improves. Hopefully that makes sense, but let's go through some functionality here. I'm going to go back into Lawrence. So the actual scenarios, again, are saved versions of a certain set of assumptions. And if I wanted to say in my worst case scenario, I went to my projections and I had different projections to add, I can incorporate those into my worst case overall. It starts with the base data. So notice as I've come back here, my worst case version A is where we started with Lawrence before we added any of those projections in the first place. So that's kind of neat. It reverts to the data that is loaded, user defaults or admin, right now it's admin defaults. If I change it to user defaults, remember that's the spreadsheet that we had uploaded a moment ago, then it is actually incorporating that preloaded data set that we just experimented with that had our experiments with varying annual amounts and the constant annual amounts. You have some basic things. While I'm here, I'll just show you. I like the line for my ongoing. It's just easier to keep track of in my mind. You can change the axis to be responsive, or you can change the sensitivity of the axis. Those types of things are available for every one of those plots as you're using this to communicate overall. So while I was doing that, I thought I would explain what I was up to. And so back to scenarios overall. We have no background scenario here. I'll go ahead and choose one in the background just to have it there. A scenario also allows you to have a subset of initiatives to choose from that are different depending on the scenario that you're picking. And so let's move into initiatives so I can demonstrate that. And I'll go back to the demo here for one moment. I want to show you in main scenario and in worst case, the only difference here is that in my main baseline scenario, I didn't have the sales tax decrease by 20%. That only came when I chose worst case scenario. And when I go to scenarios, I can see that. This is a shared scenario where that sales tax decline, and it appears when I choose general fund, if I go to marijuana, it has nothing that is coming up. So now when I go back to my main page, there's nothing on marijuana as our revenue increase example. Whereas if I go back to the main scenario and show you again this menu, marijuana had general fund selected, and that's why it's showing up on that front screen. Let me make a further point. If I go to worst case scenario and I take off things like the 10-year CIP, comp study recommendations, I want to leave federal or state support, the new firehouse, new rec center, and my water asset management plan, and then I come back to the main plot, I only have this subset of initiatives that I want to talk about for that particular meeting. I don't want to talk about the rec center anymore. Maybe that's a decision that we made in the past. However, if I did want the rec center to be among the things that we're discussing, I can choose general fund. It's a shared initiative. It pops back up on my list, and I can say, the reason I might do that is to say, hey, we actually haven't made this decision yet. What happens if we, in this COVID scenario, want to take that off the list? That's one of the things we might do, is decrease our capital outlay and our commitments to the new rec center and see what that does to our picture. So initiatives are just things that you want to talk about that either have an ongoing or one-time revenue impact, or an ongoing or one-time expense impact. And as I get to this initiatives tab, this is where it's keeping track of everything. All initiatives in your model. What's kind of neat is as you create an initiative, you can choose to share it, or if you don't share it, that initiative will only be available to the scenario that you're in. If I share it, then in any different scenario, you can choose to bring it to that front page. So let's come up with an initiative name. And this initiative will be, let's do sales tax decrease is 10%. So things are getting a little bit better. This is not pulling directly from your projections. You could do it that way. The initiatives are kind of like, they're easier. They're more back of the napkin type of projections that you want to incorporate. So in this case, it's an ongoing revenue that I'm talking about, and it's still negative, but maybe it's only impacting us if I knew 500,000, for example, that a 10% drop in our sales tax equates to about a $500,000 hit. I just want to show roughly what that looks like. And I'll try to do this faster. I'm going to save this initiative. You can write some general notes in here. And I'll proceed. And I go back to scenarios, and I see that it's appeared here. Sales tax decrease is 10%. I'm going to make sure that the general fund is able to, I choose general fund so that it shows up on this front screen. And now what's kind of nice is I'm going to turn off this real worst case scenario of a 20% decline. And all we have now to deal with is a 10% decline, and it looks a lot better. So that could be an update to the situation to be able to plot. I'll pause there. My goal was to make sure I got through the fact that you can create various scenarios and why you would do it, and also to get into the initiative library, how to create an initiative, how to make sure it's shared and turned on for the general fund, and then where it shows up on your set of decisions to make on the front screen. Normally we have like 6 more minutes or so. I'll pause there and see. I know that was probably a lot of information, but any questions on initiatives or scenarios or things that you might want to model? All right, no questions. This was as far as I was hoping to get today through the forecasting and into the scenario building in terms of showing you the functionality. Our hope is once you get your data loaded, like Lawrence and Jefferson County, then we're going to move into the forecasting component. Technically, you don't have to have a baseline scenario to have as a background data set. You could just start to get into, here's our projection as of today, and to the best of our knowledge, this is what the future looks like. It's a worst case scenario, and that would be totally fine. One thought about creating a baseline scenario in the background is just to be able to demonstrate what is actually changing and to see, how dire or not dire your what if scenario is beginning to look like. So Mark, as you were starting to say, you're starting to get into the projections here. I just wanted to make sure you knew it's not like a prerequisite that you need a background. Here's what things were looking like. I know that could just be extra work in a time when you don't have, all the time in the world to do yesterday's projections and then the projections of what the world looks like moving forward. Does anybody have any questions on what types of initiatives or what types of scenarios they might want to model? Or reflections? Teresa, when building the data to be loaded, is there anything to keep in when identifying the categories that will help with building the scenarios? Teresa, I'm going to take you off mute, and if you wouldn't mind asking your question to the group.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
So sorry, I kind of botched typing that. So I guess what I'm asking is, as you're building the data for Liz then to populate into the tool, you have to identify the different categories. Is there anything, any tips or anything you need to keep in mind in regards to types of categories that would make building scenarios easier?
I can answer that.
Okay.
So one reason these categories in the beginning came about as when you go into the projections tab and you're creating the calculated projections, it's a lot easier when you have that category to filter on, because then you can say, you can lump like charges and just assign them all a quick constant annual projection value if you're trying to model your future quickly. So that's one reason why lump certain things together with that category, is if maybe they all have a very similar future. Then you can filter on them and change things real quick. Another reason why you might want to have a category for something is it's maybe something that you're very focused on right now. And so maybe you want to break out certain aspects of your budget and give them their own category because they're very relevant right now to the scenario you're building. Maybe otherwise they might not be on a normal day. Maybe now suddenly you want to make a new category for some very important parts of your budget. And so you can give them a category that may or may not have already existed for you, but that'll give you a way to pull them out and filter them out later, and also highlight them with this add to menu feature. And so it gives you a way to grab things easier and lump them together for these attributes, basically.
Yeah, what I was thinking as Chris was going through that was, you know, we would be very interested in building multiple sales and use tax scenarios. And if that is our goal, should we keep sales and use tax in its own category rather than just lumping it in, say, all taxes?
I think that totally makes sense, Teresa, because you're going to have a separate projection, specifically probably a worst case impact on those sales and use tax that you want to look at separately from all the taxes coming in. I think that makes complete sense that you'd want that one broken out.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Great point.
One more comment I have about one reason we try to reduce the data set, kind of roll it up to a shorter number of categories than are often in the budgets, is because each of these line items can be represented on that front page as and have its constant annual projection changed. And so if it's not a single line item, it doesn't, what am I trying to say? Basically, each line item can be put over here under this projection area where Chris is playing with. So if it's not by itself, you can't put it over here. So that's one reason you both want it to be, in some cases, more vague, and then in some cases more specific. So if you want it over here, it needs to be its own line item. On the other hand, if it's not in a category with other things that you might want to be changing together, then it's harder to group them, to change them all together.
Makes total sense. Thanks, Summer. Great question, Teresa. Thank you for that. I know we are at the time limit for the end of this course. Happy to stay on and answer more questions. Teresa said, Wilmer, how hard is it to change the categories after the data is loaded? So, and Summer and Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that, I believe the answer to the question, or at least part of it, is, Teresa, so long as you can download the budget data and change it here, that is going to be as hard as it gets. Is that accurate?
No, sorry, Chris.
Okay, sorry.
Changing that category in our system constitutes changing of an account. So we would have to, I think, defer to Liz if you're changing the account itself after you've already uploaded it. So if you're going to delete account and change it, which is what this amounts to in our system, it would be more difficult. But changing the numbers themselves, the values, is really easy with that upload download form. But to get things moving along, right now we are, if it involves a deletion and a change of the actual account information, seek one of us to help you out with that. We can also show you how, but that might be a little a breakout session to show you how to do that.
So takeaway, numbers, easy, categories, seek our help.
But just to reiterate, if you do want to do that, it's not a monumental task from our side. So I would say, you know, get the data to us, let us get it in the tools. We're more than happy to help you edit that.
Awesome. All right. Thank you again, Teresa. And thanks everybody for staying on the line. Is there any other questions, or do you feel like you have enough once your data is loaded to get going? This session's recorded, and you'll have our continuous classroom support along the way to work specifically on any questions that you have that come up. But hopefully this is enough to get you going and thinking about your forecast. Hope to get your data in as soon as possible. And for Lawrence and Jefferson County, we'll be moving with you guys into the next step and hoping this is looking doable. But thanks so much, everybody. Our next repeat of Liz's course, the data loading, is tomorrow. And then Friday, I have a repeat of this course, as well as some open hours. And we'll be posting, making sure you have registration links for those on the Slack channel for Fiscal Health, as well as our homepage overall. So thanks a ton, and we'll go ahead and wrap up for today.